Steel Division Normandy 44 is a tactical real-time strategy game developed by Eugen Systems, the creators of titles like Wargame and Ruse. This new game puts players in command of detailed, historically accurate tanks, troops and vehicles at the height of World War II. Players can measure their tactical skills against several opponents in big multiplayer battles or against enemies in a challenging single-player campaign. Steel Division Normandy 44 allows players to take control over legendary military divisions from 6 different countries, such as the American 101st Airborne, the German Armoured 21st Panzer, or the 3rd Canadian Division during the invasion of Normandy in 1944. So first off, I'll start with the graphics, which are functional but quite charming. Up close, the unit rosters remind me of the classic detail models from the Mission Combat series. Nice little chunky models. Animations are not perfect, they are decent, and watching battles unfold up close is enjoyable. Even if you don't have much time to do that, as it is wise to keep an eye on things, a bit like in a lot of Total War games. There's very little time to actually go into cinematic mode while you're fighting to admire the fighting. You've got to stay on top all the time, and of course the secondary objectives are always incentives as well. Gameplay is fast and frenetic. The game is, of course, centered around the conflict in 1944 in northern France, where the Allies were landing and establishing a beachhead against the German forces. So there are 3 main campaigns: USA, which is sort of an extension of the tutorial. Tutorial, by the way, very good, worth play. As I mentioned in the intro, of course, there are also German and British/Canadian campaigns. These are definitely harder than the USA. The USA campaign is more or less an extension of the tutorial, whereas the German and British are actually pretty tricky to finish. The gameplay is similar in many ways to Company of Heroes or Army Men. You don't have the option to take direct control of units, but there is a basic cover system. It is also possible to attack a specific area or instruct your soldiers and tanks to take a certain area themselves, clicking on a length using the assault command. It is a game where looking at the map and objectives and thinking, something that is often endangered in today's games, thinking carefully about how to achieve varied objectives. Combat is pretty satisfying, training your artillery where you estimate the enemy and enjoying tearing up buildings and foliage in the process. The scenery does break up, which is a small but important realism factor, certainly adds to the experience. Statistics are very detailed, although it isn't hard to gauge the right unit for the right task. For example, an MG team are deadly to clusters of attacking troops, where an anti-tank gun can be the kryptonite needed to knock out a large tank. As you learn to play, the missions and scenarios available are increasingly epic and chaotic. Indeed, multitaskers will often succeed here, although putting the game speed back to slow or very slow can certainly help you. Most missions require at least a couple of attempts to finish, as I've said, learning from mistakes and adjusting strategy accordingly. Personally, I found limiting off-screen units to guard strategic points or having redundant units sweep across to my core group work best. The assault command allowing you to send supporting units off onto the flank while you control a particularly strong tank or artillery unit. Taking my own shots in the dark. The fog of war means that predicting or estimating where the enemy is, it can be very useful if you are good at that. Therefore, using the fire at a certain area command can really enhance the effectiveness. And like I said, I will pick a strong unit to control. For example, the Americans, I would probably use a Sherman M4 late war, whereas the Germans perhaps Panther aus D. These are strong units, and when you use the firing at specific ground control in the correct way, you can actually shred all kinds of enemy armor. Kind of like the film Fury, or in real life, if I think of perhaps the Black Baron Michael Whitman. So the latter stages of the British and German campaigns at first I thought were too difficult. However, as I gained experience with the detailed game mechanics, units, and learned to use the keyboard shortcuts, before I knew it, I was failing or succeeding by a hair's breadth, enjoying all the apocalyptic carnage that entails a large-scale assault or a desperate defense. Overall, this title is very fun, albeit limited in terms of content. Blasting through 1944 France, the statistical and historical attention to detail, typical of a Paradox title, matched with some neat, lush graphics and animation, all adds up to a great game. The biggest drawback really is the lack of single-player content. The American campaign is a good way to familiarise yourself with the game and the controls, particularly the keyboard shortcuts, but is also pretty easy. The German and British campaigns are the most relentless, epic and challenging, but just 4 missions for each and no DLC expanding the campaigns means that content is very limited really, and there are DLCs for the game, but majority of these just add units to multiplayer. I should mention there is, besides the campaign, there are scenarios, again similar to the Combat Mission series. If you played those classic games, I remember those games generally didn't actually, in a lot of cases, they didn't have campaigns, they just had scenarios. So if that's your kind of thing, if you like playing those scenarios, there are a few here, but again, they're not a massive amount. Think like the historical battles part of a Total War game, and you have to pay for half of them because they're under DLC. Multiplayer, I haven't mentioned, but it does boast that you can play 10v10 online, and apparently that was very good. I can read from the forums and things, but it's not as active as it was. So multiplayer is still possible, but I think you might have to kind of join a few groups or make a few appropriate friends if you want to play online, because they're not, so the online isn't as active. And there is a sequel of this game, Steel Division 2, so a lot of people have gone there. Of course, this channel I review content not just based on, you know, being recent, but being good, being worthy of a review. And this is a good game. The only drawbacks, really, the main drawbacks, is just the lack of content. The dynamic and playing the game is fun. Another thing that it's lacking perhaps actually is unit development. For example, in the Panzer Front games, you can use a lot of, which is a turn-based game, you can use a lot of units that come back into future campaigns. They can collect medals and stars, and a lot of strategy games also you can kind of personalize things, and that would have been a nice addition. But overall, a really good game. If there was more content, and it's a shame to rate a game based on it not having a great amount of campaign content, but it would have probably got higher perhaps, but I've got to give it not 8.5, I'll give it 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10, I think that's a good score. But I've already listed what it is, and it's cheap on Steam. It seems to be on sale now because of the sequel, so it's a good price, and the campaigns are still, despite being short, they do take quite a few hours to finish. There's replay, definitely you'll have to play some of those missions more than once, they are tricky. So yeah, good overall. Cheers guys, and I will see you guys soon for another video. Cheers.